I'm going to start recording this. Uh, I hope you gathered from my emails that I'd like to do like a series of interviews, if you will.
Yeah,
Sometime, hopefully in the not too distant future, I can start a vlog, with those little 5-minute clips here and there,
yeah,
try to boost interest in the Korean War, in the Vietnam War, increase my education on the Vietnam War. And hopefully, I don't know how you perceive this, but I'd like to redress a couple of videos that are out there, comments that are made by other so-called historians about your grandfather's background, and not his background, but his address, or the way they addressed him during the Korean War. I think a lot of that's unjust and unfair. We've had that conversation before. So if you want to field some of that during this process, that'd be great. But today, let's start with you. We met in September of 22.
yeah, that's right.
And I recall our conversation going a little more long-winded for our first half meeting. Tried to eat dinner, the wives were there, the whole 9 yards. It really captured my attention quick. So I'm going to give the microphone over to you and let you give a little background on who you are,
Sure.
how this came about. So take the role there, boss man.
Go ahead and start.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so how to start? I think I've told you some of this, but I'm not going to worry about what I may have already told you, because it's got to kind of be a complete story, right? Kind of.
Yeah, it's all going to feed in. There'll be cut-ins and whatnot along the way. So
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so my father and mother were married at West Point on my dad's graduation day in 1942, and he joined the Army Air Corps, and pretty soon he was flying, basic flight training, and then eventually he had to go out to the West Coast. And my mom and I, at this point, I was just in her womb. I wasn't born yet, but I was born at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, in August of 1943, when my father was away on the West Coast with his unit. And the reason we were in Arizona was because of General Alman and my grandmother, Margaret Alman. He was the commanding general at Fort Huachuca of the 92nd Infantry Division. They were getting ready to go over to fight in Italy.
right.
But in any case, that's how I was born there. And my father, Tom Gallo, his name was Tom Galloway. I was Tom Galloway Jr. And after further training, unfortunately, I didn't get to know him because I was so young when he died. And as I may have told you, after he got all of his training and his unit deployed to England, to the UK, they started flying missions in May of 1944. And they were flying on D-Day and through the Normandy invasion. And eventually, in July of 44, my father was in a dogfight with a German unit over Normandy, and he went down 24th of July 44. And my family wasn't sure at the time. All they knew was he was missing in action. But a few months later, the word came out that he'd been recovered by the French resistance, and they could not revive him. And so initially he was buried in a small French village there. I never got to go there until 2004, on the 60th anniversary of his death. My wife June and I think you met her there on the table with us. But we went to see first to England, just go to his base and all that to learn what we could from the Brits and the museum they had at the base. And then we went over to France, where I had a wonderful French friend who I'd gone to graduate school with. He met us. He was our chauffeur, our guide, and our translator, all the above. And, he took us down to the beaches of D-Day, because I'd never been able to do that. And then we did that very well. And then from the beaches of D-Day, especially Omaha, we went out to the little village and spent several days there. And the French people were, from the mayor on down, it was a wonderful experience. Sad in some way, but it was a long time. It was 60 years to the day that we were there when he had gone down. And we did learn an awful lot, like I say. And so this was I'm giving you this background just so you know where I'm coming from. And luckily for my mom and me, after the war, so I'm going to put aside my father, Tom Galloway, now, and just talk a little bit about my connection, my very close connection with my grandparents, maternal grandparents, Ned Almond and his wife, Margaret. And as you may know, he had, you do know that he was in Italy with the 92nd. And then after the war, when the war was almost over, he had been brought back to command the Second Infantry Division, and they were going to be on the invasion of Japan. So he was given the honor of having that unit. And then, of course, the bombs were dropped, the big ones, on Japan, and the war was over. And then he had several choices about where he might be assigned after the end of World War II. And one of those choices was to go to join General MacArthur in Tokyo, a man he had never worked for, but admired from afar. And he went to Tokyo, and as you may know, initially he was not the chief of staff, but after joining the staff, he was one of the staff principals, and a few years later, he became MacArthur's chief. My grandmother, my Almond grandmother, my mom, and me, just the three of us, went out to Japan on the first ship. It's a troop ship, but the first time families were allowed to go out to Tokyo, Yokohama, and then to Tokyo. At the time, I was about 3 years old, because I was born in 43, and now it's early 46 when we went out there. And so we lived with my grandparents in Tokyo until my mom met a West Point classmate whose name was Charles Fergusson. And they fell in love and were married in Tokyo. The wedding actually was at my grandparents' home in Tokyo, at the quarters, if you will, of the chief of staff by that time. And that's how I think I became much more connected to my grandparents by living in Tokyo there with my mom. And then, of course, my grandparents stayed right on in to the Korean War period. And my mom and I accompanied my dad, stepfather, back to the States, where he was an Army officer, not a Air Force or Army Air Force guy like my father, Tom. But they were in the same cadet company at West Point, so they knew each other well. They were friends, and now he becomes my stepfather. He adopted me, and sometime in the late 40s, I can't even tell you exactly when, but so my name was Thomas Galloway Fergusson, Thomas Galloway Jr., and that's when, after the paperwork was done and all, he adopted me, and I was Thomas Galloway Fergusson, and I am today. So anyway, I was definitely brought up in the Army and the Air Corps in a way, and my stepfather loved West Point, and he never pressured me to go there. I just think I felt like I wanted to go there, because when I was 8, 9, 10 years old, that period of my life, my stepfather was teaching at West Point. I'm just going to call him my dad because that's the way I thought about him. I never knew the other one, and he was teaching there, and I got exposed to West Point at a formative age, and one where I could enjoy. West Point cadets were my Sunday school teachers, and I went to the Army football games and a lot of other stuff. I kind of leave that aside. So
you were an Army brat from start to finish.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And we did move around a lot, as a typical Army family. And after after we came back from Japan, we lived at Princeton because the Army was good enough to send him to study at Princeton University, a wonderful school. And my younger brother, who was really a half brother, same mom, different dad, and he was named after my grandfather. His name is Edward Mallory Almond Fergusson. We gave him a nickname, EMAF, EMAF, the acronym EMAF for Edward Mallory Almond Fergusson. So he was born there at Princeton, and a few years later, after my dad got his master's degree, and we went to Fort Knox. Of course, that's in your state. I think that's your state, Kentucky.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
To lower your camera just a little bit. I'm getting like some hearing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me see if I can.
Now we're coming.
I was looking at you and not noticing I was cut off there.
Yeah. So
anyway, what's that?
So you were at Fort Knox? Yeah, that's my home.
Yeah, it was at Fort Knox at that time. We were there for a year while my dad was armor, and he went through the armor advanced course there at Knox, and so I got exposed to the tankers in that period. And after that, after Knox, we went to West Point, where he taught for 3 years. We lived there, and then from there we went out back to the kind of the Midwest, middle of the country, to Fort Leavenworth, where my dad went to the Command and General Staff College, and I was in the 6th grade. And from there, we went to live in Turkey. My dad got orders to the NATO headquarters in Izmir on the west coast of Turkey.
Wow.
As it so happens, our daughter, whose name is Robin, she is in Berlin right now, and she will, in a few days, next week, she will fly to Turkey. She'd never been there, and she's doing work in Berlin at a film festival, believe it or not. That's one of her real passions is the entertainment industry, particularly film and stage. She's a good actress, but she's also, anyway, I won't get sidetracked on that. But she's on her way to Turkey around the 25th of this month, and she will visit Istanbul, the big city there on the and straddling Europe and Asia, the border. And then she'll go down to Izmir, and she wants to see where our family lived, long before she was born. We lived in Turkey, and I was in junior high, and came that wonderful place and came back to Fort Polk, Louisiana. And there, my dad was in the 1st Armored Division there. He became the G3. And then from
Division in Fort Polk, I thought they were in Texas at that point.
No, Fort Polk is in Louisiana, north of Lake Charles, if you know where that is.
Oh, I'm familiar with that. I was just thinking that 1st Armored Division, they started out at Fort Knox.
Yeah.
Coming up from Texas, but then after the war, during Korea, by 1950, I'm thinking they were moved down to Texas, but maybe I'm wrong about that.
They may have moved there. I'll give you the exact period. We were there in 1954, 55. 54, is that? Let me get it right here. No, it's after we came back from Turkey. So we were there in 1957, 58. And then in 58, we had only 1 year there at Fort Polk. And of course, the 1st Armored Division may have moved to Fort Hood, Texas.
Yeah,
I think that may be what you're thinking about.
yeah,
The first Cav and the Second Armored Division were there for a long time,
right.
and I can't tell you which divisions are there right now, other than I'm pretty sure the First Cavalry Division is still at
I think it's Second Army, because I remember the 66th Tank Battalion came out of Fort Hood,
uh-huh.
the other 50,
Yeah.
and that was Second Army Division. A couple of the sergeants there were volunteering and voluntold. Actually, one volunteered and the rest were voluntold for Korea. So anyway, let me get back to you. Don't let me get down a rabbit hole.
So from Fort, yeah, we'd been in Turkey, Fort Polk, and from there, I was only in the ninth grade there, first year of high school there, and we lived in DeRidder, next door to Fort Polk,
Okay.
and we enjoyed living in Louisiana. And then it was back. My dad got orders to the Pentagon, so we moved to Arlington, Virginia, and I went to high school in Arlington for my final. I was lucky because a lot of Army brats get moved around while they're in high school, and at least I had the last 3 years in one school, and it was a good public school, and I that was my final year. I knew I wanted to try to go to West Point, so I applied. I got an appointment from Alabama, and that was because uh, my grandparents lived there. I'd been moving around all the time, so I had no real place to call home. So with the help of my granddad, who put me in touch with the congressman there in that part of Alabama, I was able to win an appointment and, entered West Point in summer of '61.
Let me back you up for just a
Yeah,
minute. When you
yeah,
were in high school at Arlington, did you do ROTC or was that available to you?
was not available. Was not available in those days in high school, at least not in my high school, which was the name of their school was Wakefield. It's funny, my stepfather had gone to also high school in Arlington. He moved around too. His dad was not a military guy, but he was moving around a lot. He worked for the Department of Agriculture. But anyway, he went to Washington Lee High School in Arlington, and the arch rival of that school, my school, was much newer. But Wakefield and Washington Lee were arch rivals. It's kind of funny coincidence.
Right.
And then so I entered West Point summer of '61, and about that time, my dad actually got orders for Korea. So he went to Korea, and
From the base?
I beg your pardon.
Do you remember the base he went to, like Comfy or?
Yeah, he commanded a ground cavalry, not aircraft cav, but ground cav squadron. And there were two divisions in Korea at the time, not one like there is today. Today it has been for quite a while, uh, the Second Infantry Division. But at the time, my dad was the Cav Squadron commander for the other division. That was the Seventh. You had the Seventh and the Second, and the Seventh was a little bit to the west, and the Second was a little bit more to the west, kind of the main approach toward Seoul. They were defending that, and my dad's unit, of course, he was being the Cav. They were in front of the whole division in the Chorwan Valley. So they were up in that part, kind of a little bit more northeast of Seoul. So you kind of get the picture of the two divisions. But that was an unaccompanied tour. So the family, my mom and brother, and now by this time I had a sister. She was born at West Point when my dad was teaching there. So, two boys and a girl, and all Army brats. And actually, I'll jump around a little bit. My brother, Edward Mallory Almond Fergusson, EMAF, he actually went to West Point, graduated there in 1971. And so he was 6 years, my junior. And he didn't stay in the Army as long as I did. I call him Ned. Ned was in the Army. He went in the infantry like his grandfather, our grandfather. Grandfather, of course, as you know, didn't go to West Point. He went to VMI, Virginia Military,
Right.
and he was very loyal.
Followed in Patton's footsteps, as it were.
Yeah, Patton went there for a bit, and then he went to West Point. But anyway, you know, okay, I'm back at West Point now. Try to keep myself straight, and I had an unlucky accident in my kind of between my plebe year, freshman year, and my yearling year, which is your sophomore year. But I was already a yearling. So it was the summer of 1962. And we, the yearling class, the class of 1965, but at this time we were lowly plebes, and now we were getting a little bit higher. We were sophomore yearling. And we were learning how on this particular day in summer of 62, we were learning how to load and fire the bazooka, the anti-tank rocket, 3.5-inch rocket.
The big boy.
What's that?
The bigger boy.
Yeah, that's
Like
right.
the 2.8 from the early Korea era. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. There were several iterations or several sizes, but anyway, it was a two-man weapon, and in this particular instance, I was the loader, and my classmate was firing the bazooka at a target downrange, and everybody did everything okay, and we were actually wearing protective goggles because, you know, it was of some danger to the eye. I never dreamed it would be the danger that it was and would change my life in a flash of a second. But when he fired, and I was doing as we were told, you know, I was looking toward the rear of the weapon in case anyone should be foolish enough to get behind you. I would scream and we wouldn't fire because you could be killed by the backblast of that weapon. And so anyway, when he fired, I just felt, and I, again, wearing the goggles, but I felt a blast on my face. And the next thing I knew, I had some pain, not a whole lot, but pain in my eye. It was a lot of blood pouring out of the right corner of my eye. And the medics came rushing up to see what was going on with me. And I said, well, you know, initially I said I could see okay. They were worried maybe something got in my eye. And a few minutes later, I said, gee, you know, I really can't see. I've got something blocking my vision. I should make sure the goggles are out of the way and all that. They said, well, we will kind of patch you up and we'll get you back into the hospital at West Point. So long story short, I got back there and saw the eye doctor, and he quickly discovered that I was I had a lot of hemorrhaging inside the eye. That was not good. And then the more he looked, the more he began to see what he thought were shiny objects in the back of the eye. Well, it was tiny pieces of shrapnel that had come out of that bazooka, and big investigation ensued. And just by fortune or whatever, the safety officer on the range that day out at Camp Buckner at West Point had been an All-American football player at West Point. So he was a famous guy. And everybody went, oh, gee, is it going to be the end of his Army career, or is he in trouble or something because they didn't do things right? No, nobody did anything wrong.
Just a freak accident.
Freak accident. Those are the right words, right? So unfortunately, to save the eye, they had to get all that stuff out best they could. I discovered a few years ago when I was I had some signs that I might have had a mini stroke. That's not good. This was about 20 years ago, actually. And so I've survived all that. And I was at Reston Hospital, and they were doing all these different tests. I spent about 4 days and 4 nights in the hospital. And they said, well, you know, they said, it looks like you've got some something. You got metal or something it's either in your eye or around your eye. I said, what? I thought the docs told me they got all that stuff out like back in 62, when after the accident. But no, that was not the case. So anyway, they did their best, and I came back to West Point. I thought for a while I might not even be able to continue my preparation or my road to graduation at West Point. They wouldn't let me do contact sports that year, but I did all the rest once I got over the operation and stuff. And I didn't have to worry about the eye again, really, until my senior year. And now it's like less than 2 months to graduation. The spring of 65, all of us were looking forward to getting the hell out of West Point, pinning our lieutenant's bars on. And pretty much we all knew we were going to Vietnam because it's 65.
Yeah, kickoff time.
Some of the Marines had already landed there, and some few Army units were in there as well.
Yeah.
So anyway, we knew we were going to Vietnam, and here I am a couple of months before, and now I'm going to visit the, oh, no, I have to tell the story the right way. So I went down to Baltimore on the train because my Galloway grandfather had passed away. I'd still kept in touch. I had 3 sets of grandparents because, a mom and 2 dads. And anyway, he had passed away. I went to his funeral. On the way back to West Point, I lost my glasses. I was nearsighted even then. So I lost the glasses. I had to go see the eye doc at West Point. And he said, of course, he's formal. Later, we became very close friends. We still are. But luckily, he was a fine young eye surgeon. But he said, I see, Mr. Fergusson, that you are, you're close to graduation. He said, you're going to Airborne and Ranger School, right? I said, yes, Doc. That's exactly where I'm going. I'm also, I didn't have the vision to follow my father, Tom Galloway, into aviation, which I might have liked to have done. But I did have the inclination to go either infantry like my granddad or armor like my stepfather. And I decided to go armor. So I had my orders to go to Germany but first I would go to Airborne and Ranger and Airborne School. And but all that changed because the doc said, he said, with all this problem you've had with your eye, he said, I'm going to have to take a real close look at your eye because, it might not be good for you to go to Airborne and Ranger School, but I'll check it out, So he's checking me out and checking. I said, Doc, this is taking a long time. I'm looking at my watch. I had an exam or something I had to go get ready for. Yeah. He said, well, I hate to be the bearer of bad tidings, but he said, you've got, I can tell you for sure, you have a retinal detachment. So because of this earlier injury, like 3 years before that, roughly 3 years before that, now I'm facing much more complicated surgery, not just to get little metal out, but to try something in those days that was very hard to do, which is to reattach the retina. And I won't even get into that, except to say that I came back down to Walter Reed, just like I did the first time. And the first retinal operation, it looked okay initially, and the doctor said, no, it didn't work out. We're going to have to go in there and cut those eye muscles, and do everything all over. I said, yeah. And so they did. And so I went back to West Point, and now it's only a few weeks before, even less than 2 weeks, I think, before graduation. So the same eye doctor said, well, I want to see what those guys down at Walter Reed did, so I'm going to check you out, and he checked me out. And he said, I hate to be the bearer of bad tidings. He said, but you have a retinal detachment. Again, everything has come loose again. So I said, wow.
Probably a result of all the scar tissue from the other surgery.
And he said, he said, they want you to come back down to Walter Reed and they're going to operate for a third time on the retina. And I said, holy cow, because I knew every time they operated, the chances of success are going down.
Exactly.
Probably not going to have a good result, but Dr. Montgomery, John Montgomery was the doc's name. And he said, look, he said, after graduation ceremony, he said, you're going to graduate, but you're not going to be able to get your commission until we have a medical board. After all this surgery stuff is over, we'll have a medical board. You know, in the meantime, you'll be a graduated cadet. You're not going to be a lieutenant, even though all of your 600 classmates are going to be lieutenants. I said, Doc, how can we, how can this happen? So anyway, he said, I want you to come see me and your parents. Your parents are, of course, will be there for graduation. And you and your parents come see me. Well, the rascal he had talked to my parents behind my back, so to speak. And they kept it secret because they wanted him to break the news when we all came together. He said, you know, because your retinal surgery didn't work out. And he said, because the Army wants to do this again at Walter Reed. But he said, my advice, and he was kind of taking a risk if he had any thoughts of a career as an Army doctor. But my advice to your parents, and my stepfather by this time was a colonel, and he and my mom were at Carlisle Barracks, Pennsylvania, where he was on the faculty. So anyway, he said, my advice to them and to you is that you need to go. There's only about 3 doctors in the world. They're all in the US. And one of them is pretty close to where you're going to be because he's up in Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore. And I recommend you go there because that'll give you your best chance of getting this eye fixed. He said, but he said, he said that it would be, it was something that the Army wanted to bring you back to Walter Reed. And because that, and they have very good doctors there, he agreed with that. But he said they don't have the level of specialization that these few guys have.
Yeah, this
world renowned, you know. But your family, you or your family is going to have to pay for the surgery.
Oh, wow. Because
the Army says no, they won't pay for it. So my parents already knew about this recommendation, and they said, we're prepared to do that, even though, you know, Army officers don't get rich. Generally, they don't make a huge amount of money.
That is a rule, correct.
but they said, so we all agreed, okay, I guess I signed up to go to Johns Hopkins, and I get there after graduation, of course, and the great Dr. Pierce, he has like this dark room with lots of his eye patients. They're all either waiting surgery or waiting for his examination and stuff. And I said to Dr. Pierce, I said, well, I understand you're the best I could get. And I'm sure you'll have a high chance of percentage of fixing my eye. I said, what chance do you give me? And I guess he's the kind of guy who doesn't ever want to get your hopes up too much. He said, maybe about 25 or 30% chance. And I said, wow.
That's depressing.
I said, let's go ahead and get it done, you know. So, and he put that retina back on, and knock on wood, that retina has stayed on ever since. All these years, John. That was in 1965, and in a few years it will be 60 years ago since 1965. And I will confess, I had another retinal surgery, not as difficult and maybe as complicated today because of technology, but I had it in 2018. So, you know, a few years ago. And
cataract surgery or what?
Yeah, another retinal surgery,
Oh,
right?
no, retinal surgery, I'm sorry.
Yeah. And this time, instead of the old-fashioned way of having to cut, you don't want to hear to cut the muscle around your eye and turn it around and all that and operate, from the back. By this time, they were able to literally put a little teeny hole through the front of your eye and put a little gadget through so they could do this delicate surgery on the back of the eye by going through the front. Amazing.
Just a sidebar, and I won't finish, I'll leave the camera on this. In '67, when I was 5,
Yep.
I was born with amblyopia, which is a lazy eye.
Ah,
And first surgery they did, the only surgery they did, was in '67. And they did like you said. They pull the eye out, they turn it around, they cut some muscles, realign it. Okay. So up until about the age of 50, it looks like I have standard, you know, vision of
yep.
both people facing forward. After the age of 50, which is 45 years after the fact, that left eye is now starting to trail. The more tired I am, the more it trails off to the left.
Huh.
I tease with my friends, it's my backup quarterback. If I close my good eye, my left eye will kick in.
Huh.
As soon as I open my good eye again, it
That
takes
is
way off.
interesting. Wow. I still have some problem with double vision once in a while, or when I read too much or something like that, but I consider myself very lucky that I didn't lose my eye right there at the beginning. And so this is a long way, a long story, but so the medical board met. I got the surgery at Johns Hopkins Wilmer Eye Institute, and then during the summer after surgery, I went and stayed with my parents. The only thing I could do there in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and on post. And then finally, in the fall of '65, when things were supposedly all healed up, I had to go back to Walter Reed for every Army eye doctor in the world to look at my eye, both eyes, but especially the right eye, as the medical board prepared to do its work, which was to decide could I even get my commission. I still was a graduated cadet, drawing cadet pay, which in those days, and maybe still is, was exactly 50% or half of a lieutenant's pay.
Wow.
But that part was minor. Just was I going to get in the Army or not?
Right. I mean, that's a lot of work for no payback,
Yeah, yeah.
no goal reached.
I had kind of decided, if I couldn't serve in the Army, I had taken more and more interest in the medical profession. I was actually thinking, with the guidance of my wonderful friend who detected the retinal detachment, John Montgomery. He's now in his late 80s and lives in Tennessee.
Wow.
He's a great guy. And anyway, so I was just kind of wondering how it's all going to come out, and the answer of the medical board was, we will either you have a choice. You can get out of the Army with no obligation to the country. You don't have to pay back for West Point and all that. Or we will give you a waiver. We'll grant a waiver, but if we do that, you cannot go in the combat arms. And I thought, geez, what else is the Army about except for the combat arms,
Ride a desk your whole life, a West Point.
Now I had to think about what else is there beside infantry, armor, aviation, artillery, those kind of engineers.
HR.
And so, long story short, that's how I ended up getting into the MI, military intelligence branch.
Okay.
Did you know I was in MI?
Yeah.
Okay.
Some of our other discussions in the past, we were talking to other people that were part of military intelligence.
Yeah.
I noticed how you picked up on their background without them ever saying their background. Yeah. And I've worked with a couple of guys that were MI.
Yeah.
Dwight Ryder being one of them. I think I've discussed him with you before. Good stuff. So
Good stuff. Yeah. So then once I had selected MI, the branch people in Washington, and they didn't have virtually any West Point graduates in MI in those days. It was the branch was only created except in the reserves. They had some reserve MI elements, but this was, pretty long after World War II, and there was still no separate branch in the regular army. But uh, but anyway, they said the people that controlled your assignments and your schooling and all in Washington said, you have a choice. There are 5 different sort of specialties in MI. Of course, one of them was electronic warfare and listening to the enemy and all that. Another one was sort of combat intelligence, being a G2 or an S2, and counterintelligence, catching the enemy spies and stuff. And the other one was like people that would recruit spies and run the spies and all that. But I picked.
Well, I was going to the CIA, right?
Well, the Army, believe it or not, had its own and still does. But carefully coordinated always with CIA. Yeah. They're the big dogs on the block when it comes to that kind of stuff. But I picked something in those days that was pretty hot and still is. It was what we called imagery intelligence. So Cuban Missile Crisis, U-2s flying over Cuba and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's what Dwight was in. That's looking at photos and you got the little lens sitting on the pedestal and you're doing the zero in on the
yeah, we learned
that kind of stuff.
Yep. So I went to Fort Holabird, which is in Baltimore at the time. Fort Holabird no longer really exists like it did in those days. It was the home of Army intelligence. But I almost flunked out of that course in the first week or so because I had double vision still from all the surgery.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Criminy, I can't even do this, I can't even have my choice in MI. But it was a work, I like to say it was a work of the Lord because I was so determined not to get kicked out of that class. There was a class of maybe 20 or 25 officers in there. And so I said, I'm going to gut it out. Please don't kick me out yet, to the instructor and stuff. And within another week or so, in class, and only in class, looking through a stereoscope, the eyes would snap in. When I left class, there was still double vision. It was kind of hard to drive safely.
Wow.
But my first assignment out of that course, the course was one of the longest in the MI officers course structure. And I knew, well, I actually know, I said, I want to go to Vietnam. So I was on my way. And I ended up, and if I've told you this, stop me, but I ended up in an Army aviation unit, which didn't fly choppers. They flew the OV-1 Mohawk.
Right.
Familiar with that?
Yeah, we discussed that, but I want you to explain that further for this particular interview. So don't hold any punches on what you did in Vietnam.
Okay, I couldn't understand everything you said. Slow down a little bit so I can hear your words.
Okay, so we've discussed some of your background in Vietnam and flying in the Hawk, but I want you to elaborate on that for this particular video, so I don't have to.
Okay, sure. Yeah, because I had 2 tours in Southeast Asia. The first one was with this Mohawk unit. I was a bachelor and I liked the unit a lot, so I extended. So I did have 18 months there. And then a few years later, after I'd come back and done some other stuff, I went back, but not to Vietnam, to Laos on my second tour. Totally different, not flying. It's a totally different kind, more in the intelligence analysis world with all sorts, and kind of working more for the ambassador and the CIA and some other people there.
Good, understood.
So
now let's not tell me anything that's going to get me killed, though. Let's be clear.
So, do you want me to keep on talking or do you want me to stop?
Oh, I want to throw a couple questions in there and then you
Yeah,
fill in wherever you see fit.
sure.
Let's go back to your West Point days.
Right.
So as a plebe, your freshman year at West Point,
Yeah.
uh, what is that like? Which, people on the outside, from the citizen point of view, think about West Point being this hardcore military, training ground. And you always hear rumors about hazing events. So you want to speak about hazing at West Point in your era? And
Well,
what is there to tell?
we didn't, I don't know why exactly. It was a type of hazing, which is not permitted today. But in
Right.
those days, back in the early 60s and for a long time, uh, I'd say the hardest part of that first year was the summer. And the name that West Point or the cadets used to describe it was beast, like a beast barracks, beast
Okay.
barracks. That was a 2 month beast barracks. And then you didn't have academics. What you had was a lot of military training, a lot of physical training, and the uniform, all that kind of stuff. And
Kind of
so,
like basic training on steroids.
yeah, that's right. That's right. And then when that summer, when that was over, right around, around Labor Day, right before that, we had what they called the plebe hike. The plebes, our class at that time, we were about 850. We started out with that many and we graduated just under 600. But the most casualties, if you will, people getting kicked out for all sorts of things or just quitting. You didn't have to stay. If you wanted to quit, you could quit
This
virtually.
was the time to go then, yeah.
There were people dropping out like flies in beef barracks, as you could imagine.
So how many how
I
many
really want to do this stuff.
how many individuals were in Beast Barracks? All 800 police?
Oh yeah, the whole class of plebes, 850. Plus you had the upper class cadre. And there were no yearlings, there were no sophomores because they weren't mature enough to be able to command or run or haze the plebes. So we had the juniors who nickname at West Point in those days. Today it's not politically correct, I guess, because women are there. But in those days, we were the cows, so the juniors were known as cows, and the seniors, who were the high-ranking people, the cows were more like your sergeants.
Yeah.
They're in the cadet hierarchy, so they were your squad leader and
Your basic NCOs, if you will.
yeah. They didn't wear those kind of stripes or anything, but in cadet, if you kind of think about it, they were holding those kind of positions. So they had to really work hard to keep the plebes on the go, all the time throughout beach barracks. And then, we as plebes, we thought that was pretty tough, with these people screaming at us all the time and jamming bracing. You had to brace. The worst part of it was bracing when you were eating. So at any meal, whether breakfast, lunch, or dinner, the plebes, and the table would have only a few upperclassmen, so a senior and maybe a couple of cows, a couple of juniors, and but the most of the people on the table were plebes, and they were watching us like hawks all the time. So if you couldn't talk to your friend, the only time you could speak is if you were spoken to by an upperclassman.
So you're sitting at the table squared back, one hand only kind of thing, or
Yeah, that's right. You were required to sit on the front no more than 6 inches of your chair. So you were bracing, and your neck had to be rammed well down, so you got wrinkles under your chin, all that
wow,
stuff,
wow.
all the time. And every item that was served, that we did have the cadets. You might think the plebes had to serve the tables. No, they had civilian waiters who were hired by the Army, and they worked for Washington Hall, the mess hall, and they had to work some hellacious hours because we were there 3 meals a day.
You remember the day, yeah. Yeah,
But,
I feel sorry for them too.
and so every item that came up, for example, if the main course was roast beef, if I'm sitting at the head of the table, my job is to take from the waiter, take that roast beef. I don't just put it down or something like that. Serve. The roast beef has arrived. The roast beef is served to the table, front of the table, sir. And it's, of course, they get to eat first. So it goes up to the senior at the head of the table and he takes his part, you know, and then eventually it gets back down to me if I'm the lowest of the low plebe at the end of the table. Same thing with drinks, except with the drinks. Like they didn't want passing a big pitcher of iced tea around or water or whatever. Sir, the iced tea is served. And then they would pass their cup or their drink or their mug down to us, and we would pour that coffee, same thing, and then very carefully, you know, goes back up to the head of the table, like
Wow.
stuff like that.
That's insane discipline there, sir.
Yeah, yeah. At the end of Beast Barracks, we thought, oh my God, this is supposed to be the hardest part, right? So now we have what West Point, it's the real name is Reorganization Week. So that's the week that you officially are done with Beast Barracks, and every plebe is assigned to his cadet company, not a Beast Barracks company. That's all gone. You will see those guys again, but you won't all be in the same company. So you go to in my case, to L2. And now what we didn't realize, suddenly during Reorgi Week, all the Corps of Cadets would come back from wherever they were. Some are training somewhere, some in Europe, some doing all kinds of stuff. Fort Knox, maybe learning more about armor. But, you know, you would be surrounded now. Instead of, you know, maybe 10 plebes for every one or two upperclassmen, now you would have 3 or 4 upperclassmen for every plebe. So a typical table, instead of a few, instead of plebes around the table, except for a few people at the head, now you've got upperclassmen from the sophomore class. They're crazy because now they think they're big shots. They're
Right.
now finally get to play the role of hazing the plebes.
Yeah, I'm alpha dog now. Yeah.
Survived all that. So, oh man, that was a rude awakening. But thank goodness academics were starting. And once the classes were really rolling, there wasn't quite as much time for the upperclassmen to harass us all the time. We got to go to class and not be harassed.
Yeah. In terms of hierarchy, you've explained freshman, sophomore, junior, senior in general terms.
Plebe, yearling, cow, and firstie.
Right. So when you see photographs of graduating classes,
yeah,
some of these officers might be 2 or 3 stripes. Some of them have several. How do you earn your ranks in West Point? How does that work out?
Your cadet rank?
Well, what goes on the sleeve by the time you're a senior?
Yeah. Okay. So
how much dressing can you put on that shoulder? And how do you get them?
That's funny. Well, it depends on which uniform you're in. So many different uniforms for cadets. But let's say we're in the summertime and where you're not wearing your dress gray, which would just, roast you.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It's a wool uniform with white, nice, fancy white trousers, but it's the jacket that would really burn you up. So in summer, they have a kind of a nice, we call it 50-50. It's a white short sleeve shirt, practical. And you've got your shoulder boards. And if you're a plebe, all you have is a gray shoulder board with nothing on it. So nothing on it except a little insignia for a different color for each class. So instantly, no matter what the rank is, you can tell what year somebody is.
Okay.
But there's no rank for a plebe. But in the second year, you would have maybe you would have a extra stripe down here in addition to the colored West Point symbol. on the edge of the board, the shoulder board. If you were wearing your dress gray or your full dress, and let's say you were, now I'm going to jump to the other end of the table, the other end of the rank structure. The seniors were the only ones in our day who were cadet officers. They could be busted down to private if they really screwed it up. Oh yeah, but and there was many cadets, many West Point graduates never achieved the rank of cadet captain or even lieutenant. If they were screwed up, or a lot, they probably stayed as a a sergeant, or maybe worse than that. If you got in a lot of trouble, got a lot of demerits. You've heard the term demerits for yeah. So if you got a lot of demerits, you would have to walk the area, meaning with your rifle and your full dress uniform, not a parade now. You're inside where the cadets, the barracks, and they're just a concrete floor to the barracks. And you would walk up and down for every demerit you went over the limit. You'd have to walk 1 hour on the area.
Oh, wow.
Sometimes you only got a few over the limit, but there were other times people got in big trouble. A good example is public display of affection. Your girlfriend might have come to visit you at West Point.
Wow.
You had a nice smooch out there somewhere where some officer or upper class cadet saw you, and he would write you up. And that would be a slug, and a SLUG. A slug means automatically. You didn't have to accumulate demerits. That's such a big offense that public display of affection, that you are going to be walking the area. And that means when there's a football game going on or anything else you want to do on the weekend, Saturday, not on Sunday. We didn't walk on Sunday, but Saturdays, many hours. You could only walk so many hours on a Saturday. So you got a big slug, like 44 and 80, maybe 44 hours on the area and 80 demerits, something like that.
Wow.
That's a lot of walking.
That's a lot of walking. In dress grays.
You're not going to see your sweetie that weekend either.
Yeah, right.
I mean, when you're a plebe, you can't even leave the post anyway. You can't leave.
Yeah.
Any girlfriend you've got on certain weekends has to come there. Either she's got to have a car, or she comes up on a bus, or maybe her, comes up with a couple of girls and one of them has a car, stuff like that.
Wow. So did you get any special awards or any awards while you were there?
Any special awards?
Yeah, I mean, like service or something.
When I think about that, the only thing I could think about was that when you get to graduation week, there's an award ceremony where those who have done really well in either physical education, athletics, intercollegiate athletics, or academics. Let's say, for example, math is a really big subject at West Point. It was the worst for many cadets. I'll give you a really good example here. One of my classmates was many years later became a 4-star general. The only one in my class that made 4-star. His name was Eric Shinseki. You know that name?
No, I did not.
He became the chief of staff of the Army. And so Shinseki, as the chief of staff, it didn't matter. But he had a hard time with mathematics. Now I'm going back to when he was a West Point plebe.
Yeah.
Many years before he became chief of staff. He was a West Point plebe, and he failed math. In those days, and I think I don't know today exactly, so I better not say. But in those days, that cadet automatically he couldn't make it up or anything. He kicked back to the next year, or he's out of West Point completely. If you weren't willing to take a demotion of a year, repeat plebe year, that's a horrible fate. But Shinseki was such a determined guy, and there are many others that have done this, that he said, nope, I'm gonna do better next time. And sure enough, when we entered as plebes, there were a few guys like him, and the way we knew we had the name for them were turnbacks. Turn back. They were turned back. He was turned back from the class of 64, West Point, the class of 65. And so, but he did fine. He didn't burn up. He never burned up math.
Right.
And he never bragged about being a turned back. But I used to tell that story because it's very interesting, I think, that somebody who had such a hard time, even with one course, would get turned back. He would make it through West Point, and he would become a general officer. And he would, even in his case, become 4-star chief of staff of the Army. Isn't that something? That's a guy with guts, determination, and he's a hell of a leader too.
For anybody that would see this video, I want to point out, you could be more elaborate about the history of West Point. But as I recall from my studies, this started out as an engineering school. People that graduated.
It did. No, it was the first engineering school in the USA. I don't know if you know that. There was no other engineering school, and so engineers were the ones who graduated, the only ones in their very early days. The first West Point was established in 1802 when Thomas Jefferson was president. And I think the earliest classes they maybe didn't go a full 4 years, maybe only 2 or 3. I'm not even sure about that.
Yeah, but if you would only graduate like 15 or 16 kids.
Yeah, very few in the class. And today on the average, I think a West Point class has got graduating over 1,000. Yeah.
So some of the notable names, Colonel Custer, General Custer become part of, he was a West Pointer?
He was. He graduated in 1861. Okay. Just as the Civil War was starting, and he became a brigadier general because the way he operated, right. Cavalryman.
And Edgar Allan Poe attended West Point, but didn't graduate.
Correct. He was.
What stories do you know of him? Because I've heard a rumor about one of his stories that he reported to the lab one morning with nothing but a saber in his boots to get kicked out of West Point. Is there any truth to that?
I would say there probably is. It probably comes very close to the truth. Okay. Yeah, I would say it does, but I don't know that story well. I really don't, but it's worth looking them up.
So the year the stars fell on.
Yeah, that's the class of 1915.
1915. Now, did that
15, have 15.
25.
And that's the same year that my grandfather, Amen, graduated from VMI. So I'll step aside here or stop to tell you a good story. Okay. I think it's a great story. When I was graduating, not only did my parents come and my girlfriend came from Texas, and of course my brother and sister, but also my grandparents came up from Alabama. And because he was the class of 1915, he and my grandmother had already been down to the 50th reunion at VMI. And so they came up to West Point. And of course, the class of 15 was having their 50th reunion. Sure. And of course, they were led by former President Dwight Eisenhower.
Wow.
And so Ike and other guys in that class, Van Fleet was another one, and Bradley.
Bradley.
They were kind enough to invite the Almonds to join them as honorary members. My grandfather, honorary member of the class of 15 at West Point.
Wow.
Knew each other, especially the generals.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I came across a little data point about Omar Bradley that caught me off guard.
Yeah.
Aside from the fact that he jumped 2 grades in World War II during the North African campaign, he skipped a grade and went straight to general under Eisenhower. But I was going through some old videos and I came across the Dean Martin celebrity roast of Bob Hope. And there on the dais, we have Flip Wilson and Foster Brooks and all those old school comedians and all that. And at the far end on the right side of the screen comes in Omar Bradley.
Ah,
The first time I had seen him on video outside of a military environment. And he still looks sharp as a tack even then. Anyway, just a sidebar.
I
Your West Point years, what would you say was your hardest part about West Point, other than your freshman year?
hardest part. That's I was because of the way I was brought up, always thinking about going there
Mhm.
and living there as a kid. It was hard to think of it, and I'm sure some of my classmates would like to kick me for this, saying this, but it was hard to hate the place. Some of them did. Some of them really did, and they probably thought about leaving more than once. I never did. I never was that miserable or anything. Probably one of my, other than going through plebe year, my bigger disappointments was it's a big deal at West Point when you can make virtually any varsity sport. Of course, football is king, but I was never good enough or big enough to be a varsity football player at West Point. But I had learned to play soccer when my dad was stationed when we lived in Turkey. Played with the Turkish neighbors and got to be pretty good at it. And played in high school, captain of my high school team. And when I went to West Point, I was able to make the soccer team, plebe soccer. I was on that, and I did well enough so that during the summer, before that eye accident, that summer before our second year, uh, before that, they posted a list we call it the Sally Port, where cadets would pass through and grades were posted there and important announcements and all that. There were no cell phones and things like that,
Right.
computers, long before that. So you had to go and read it out there in the Sally Port. And here one day in the summer of 62 was a list. They posted a list of the soccer players who'd been on the plebe team who'd made the A squad, which is a varsity, and my name was on there.
Nice.
I can't tell you how many days, how excited I was about that. I was really super happy. And I can't tell you exactly how many days there were before I had involved in the accident. But once that happened, and once I had my surgery and came back to West Point, doctors had decided that I couldn't do any contact sports. And soccer not as contact much nearly as football or lacrosse for that matter. But no.
I know a few soccer players would argue that point about how tough it really is compared to now.
Yeah. Anyway, it wasn't such a hard thing or just a bitter disappointment for that year. But fortunately, I was able to get back on the A squad in my junior year, and we had a wonderful team. We came out made the Final Four of the National College Soccer Tournament.
Right.
And unfortunately, we lost to the Naval Academy in the semifinals of the National.
Not to the midshipmen, no.
Like we couldn't have picked a worse team to lose to, but
right.
They were good.
Let's go back a little further about West Point.
Yeah.
You as a child at West Point, and I'm harkening back to my time in the early '60s, being a kid, and the things that we got involved with. Like we played with railroad tracks. I mean, that was just near our house, and all the kids, and I mean a host of us, would just swarm around the tracks and open fields. We just did all kinds of stuff. I'm curious, as a kid growing up at West Point, all those little nooks and crannies that kids find, you family at West Point that you revealed to your upperclassmen after you got in your junior senior year? Or what was it like being a kid at West Point? Who was
Oh,
the commandant?
well, that's probably one of the reasons why my first year was so miserable, especially Beast Barracks, because as a kid, I had such a great time. I was, 8, 9, 10 years old, third, fourth, fifth grades. And we lived right there on post, very close to the elementary school. I could walk to school easily. And we just had a lot of fun as a kid.
Yeah.
And here I am suddenly cut off from all of that. And all I get is yelling and punishment and, all sorts of threats and all the stuff that goes with being a plebe in Beast Barracks. And even after that, it wasn't as happy as I thought it might be. But, once you get through that first year, even before that, that's kind of fading away. One thing that's not a lot of fun is that in those days, today it's different, but in those days, plebes, only the plebes, could not go home for Christmas. And generally, the Christmas holiday, New Year's, Christmas, and all. So what if your family was going to see you? My dad, now I've told you, well, he was in Korea with commanding the Cav Squadron, but my mom drove up to West Point in December of 1961, brought my brother and sister with her, and my girlfriend from high school came with her. And, we all had a great time up here, up at West Point during that period. But a lot of people don't believe that. What? They didn't let you guys go home at Christmas? No. But they changed that. They had definitely, and it's been quite a while. And of course, the other thing that really changed West Point, I was actually teaching there when this changed. When the women entered West Point, and they entered West Point, I was teaching there from 75 to 78. The women entered in 76, and they graduated in 80. So I didn't see them.
Was that for all the other cities?
Oh my gosh. The last class of West Point that did not have, well, let me put this more accurately. So if the women entered in 76, and then that meant the last class that didn't have women graduate and were graduating was the class of 79. So they were proud, they were the last all-male class. And,
well, no,
but there were plenty of females at West Point by the time they graduated, because they started entering in 76,
So did the dropout rate with the females being there, did it increase or decrease? In your time frame there?
I couldn't understand you.
I said the dropout rate.
Oh.
With the girls, once the girls got there, did the dropout rate increase or decrease? I mean, you ever?
No, that's a sore point, because West Point wanted the public, I think, to believe that the women and the men were treated exactly the same, including physical fitness tests, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That was not true. There was a different standard, for example, push-ups, they just don't have that upper body strength. Most of them don't.
Correct.
To be able to do what normal men could do. They were in
on
good
average, right.
Yeah. But on the other side of that coin, the women did, despite all the training that, the upperclassmen got, and the faculty too, they had to be prepared. And
Right.
And I think some people said that at the time when I was teaching there, that it was actually harder for the faculty to adjust to the presence of women there, because they were older and they had less tolerance for all the changes that were
Sure.
West Point endured or, insisted
Well,
upon.
that's human nature too. People don't like change.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. Yeah,
Would be biased there.
yeah.
Who was your commandant when you were teaching, and who was your commandant when you graduated? Who was the head man in charge at West Point?
Yeah, let me go to back to when I was a cadet. Um, the superintendent, there's the top dog,
Okay.
and that was William Westmoreland,
Oh wow.
future commander in Vietnam.
Oh wow. You're gonna follow him
He
all
was
the way
West
over?
Point. He was West Point class of 1936,
Okay.
and then underneath the superintendent are normally and still two general officers, and they're both 1 star. They're both brigadier, and one is the dean, and the other is commandant. So the dean, of course, has all the academic side of West Point, all the department heads. Like I was in Department of History, and our department head was a full colonel who didn't become a general until he retired. That's an interesting thing. At West Point, the heads of departments who are full colonels, they automatically, by Congress and so forth, they automatically are promoted when they retire. So it's a nice thing to look forward to, but they never served as an active.
Right. Yeah, I
So
got
that part, but anyway, General Stilwell was our commandant, and our dean was General Jannerone, and one of Jannerone's children, actually Jack Jannerone, was in my cadet company. He was a cadet in my class of 65. Imagine if your father was the dean or the commandant. Yeah. So everybody would assume this guy got over, big time, and no, he didn't. He was actually, his son was very smart like he was.
So when you're teaching history at West Point, when you go to teach, 78, 77?
I went to graduate school at Duke, 72 to 74. Then between graduate school and teaching, 1 year out at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, for Commander General Staff College.
Okay.
And then from there, I went to teach in 75, and I was there from 75 to 78 teaching. And because I'd been a soccer player, one of my extra things I did was to be a assistant coach with Army soccer team. That was fun. And there's a lot of things you may not know. There's pretty much every instructor, not the tactical officers at West Point are the ones who are responsible first and foremost for discipline. And they're the ones who inspect the rooms, inspect the cadets in formation, all that kind of stuff. But the rest of us, I don't think the tactical, we call them TACs, I don't think they did this, but we all had plebes that were assigned to us, and we became a family away from home. That is, my wife and me and any children we might have. It was a plebe, not every day by any means, or even every weekend, but when they could, or when we invited them, they could come and have dinner, a kind of a home cooked meal, and or cook out on the barbecue and stuff like that. And it was nice to have a plebe, we call it a plebe pop, a plebe father, which was a member of in my case, one of my dad's classmates one of my two father's classmates was a man who knew both of them well. And I used to go to his home, which was the only disadvantage was a long walk from where we lived as cadets, but it was well worth it.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. But so I had my wife and I.
About to say, here's the meatloaf, right?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I'm kind of drawing a break here from there. I guess the second in my own mind here. I shouldn't have a habit of that. The older I get, the worse it seems to get. I remember last week I was telling the missus to move the car into the driveway, and for some reason, in my own head, it came out the parking lot. Moved the car to the parking lot. I have no idea where that came from. It was not in my head when I went to say it. It just rolled out of my mouth. maybe this is early onset dementia. I don't know.
No, don't say that.
In any case,
I did want to ask you
sure.
about how old are you now? You
I'm
mentioned
60. I'm 60 and a half. My birthday's in June. I was born in 62. I'm a,
62. 50.
I'm a Kentucky boy, born and bred. I've traveled the country quite well. I've probably been in somewhere around 38, maybe 39 states at some point.
Hmm.
Uh, Visitation, not living. I've always lived in Kentucky. But I've been from Alaska to Key West. I've been from Manchester, New Hampshire to Southern California.
Hmm.
There's not too many states I haven't knocked off. The entire West Coast is done. I still have to hit Texas. I probably won't go to Hawaii. I had two offers and turned them down. Same thing with Maine. And those are just too extreme for my taste. I like the mainland. I'm good here. I do expect to travel to Italy when I retire.
Huh.
The subject of my second book, Sam Arredondo, which I've mentioned to you, he was in the North African campaign and all the Italian campaigns.
Who was that?
Sam Arredondo. He was with
Oh,
the
yeah.
Division.
He sent your email. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. How old is he?
Well, he passed in '98. He had been on dialysis for about 11 years at that point. And in '98, I went to visit him in the hospital when he caught a flu.
Hmm.
And a couple of days later, he told the missus, he said, "No more dialysis." He goes, "I'm just tired and done."
Okay.
And I think part of that was him actually telling her, "I don't want to be any more of a burden to you," his wife. And Miss Kate's still going strong. It's been 3, almost 4 years now. She's 93 now, or she'll be 93. And she's the most independent 90-plus-year-old person I've ever met in my life.
This is his widow?
This is his widow. Yeah.
Where does she live?
She lives just outside of Elizabethtown, not too far from Knox. Uh, she's tough. And I don't know how you could be so polite and friendly and loving and caring and be so tough all at the same time. And she has that kind of range.
Huh.
And anyway, long story short, I want to go and re-walk his pathway. I want to go to Anzio. I want to go to Monte Cassino. He fought 2 battles at Monte Cassino. Again, like I said, Kazarine Pass and Bizerti in North Africa. He went all the way to Lake Como in Italy before the war came to an end, which for him was in May of '45. Then he came home, took a little time off, re-enlisted, ended up in 2nd Armored Division. And Korea broke out, and he went with the 66th Tank Battalion, known in Korea as the 6th Tank Battalion. Fought there until, well, he got injured November 1950. Then he came home in November of '51, but he stayed in 29 years. So he's been to Korea a couple of times, during the war and then again after the war. Just a remarkable storyline. He's a remarkable human being. And I gotta take a sidebar here, and I have to admit, this is the first long discussion I've had with anybody from an officer corps.
Huh. Yeah, I think you mentioned that you mainly worked on NCOs.
NCOs, veterans that were on the ground. There's several POWs that I've spoken with over the years. I grew up next door to a Marine that would cut your ears off if you caught you on a fence. I've always been around these people, but I've never been in the military.
Yeah.
I had interest in joining there for a while. When they told me because of my eye, I was never going to fly. So I decided I'd go to college and chase women instead, and I was pretty good at that for a while. But I don't know, this whole biographical work that I do, these interviews that I do, for me, this is my way of giving back. I just love being able to capture these stories before they're no longer able to get them.
Yeah.
So, as I mentioned to you, getting in from the horse's mouth is always the best way to fly. The clock's ticking on all our Korean veterans.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
And, one of the joys about being able to speak with you is that, your close proximity to General Alman.
Yeah.
where, like I said, through my research, I thought he got kind of a bad rub, off of Korea. I can't speak too much about his time in World War II. I know some of it, very little.
Mhm.
But, I wanted to give you an opportunity. If you wanted to address it in his time in Korea, please feel free. Uh, there's a couple of historians out there through my time in research, and I've been doing this since 2014 on just Korea and World War II, mostly Korea. That the viewpoints that I've garnered kind of stay clash to the viewpoints of historians that are well noted. From Colonel Masula, who you may have known personally, I was able to show a situation where he thought something went one way, and I was able to prove to him directly that it went the other way, even though he didn't want to discuss that with the individual that proved it, but that's a different story. There's a guy out there named Thomas Ricks.
Yep.
Who speaks on the Korean War at Berkeley, University of Berkeley, California, Berkeley. And I think he makes a lot of mistakes in his little 1 hour dissertation on how the chosen battle went. And I would love for anybody to go up and debate him, and let me just ask a couple of questions in the audience. I don't think I'm prepared to debating myself on the issue.
Yeah.
But I can definitely throw some data points on there that kind of shoot some of his ideas in the foot. I've come at this with neutral eyes originally, but the more I'm in it, the more Army leaning I get. My biases, are starting to develop more Army leaning. And you know yourself, the Marine Corps, the Navy, in that era, there's a lot of little bit of dysfunction between the branches. I don't think it's as bad now as it was back then. But looking back over it, I was like, the Army didn't go around worried about where their ribbons were coming from. They weren't, touting themselves on the back, we did this, we did that, whatever. And, someone like Thomas Ricks just gets under my skin to see someone go after history the way he did it and be so incorrect about it. Especially somebody that's supposed to know so much about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, I'm a rookie historian. That's the way I put it. So anyway, General Almond is a case example. I've heard some comments about him saying that he was very, like a better word, they don't be timid, but he was always managing to the nth degree. In other words, if somebody had a whiteboard up and they had these plans, this and this and this, General Almond would come in and he would address each different issue. But to me, yeah, you could say that's anti-lieutenant, but that's just that. You could also say he had a very serious interest in detail. And that doesn't make that a bad thing when you got lives on the line.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So anyway, if you want to address any of that today, we can. If you want to wait till later, we can do that too.
Yeah, I think because of everything else I've got going on, and I think because that's so important to me, to discuss my grandfather. I think maybe that's better left for another night or another time.
I still have not been able to. It's a sidebar. I've still not been able to get a copy, documented or otherwise, on the interview, the 75 interviews with General Almond.
Yeah.
I have not been able to come up with a copy of that for myself to go through. I was hoping maybe you could help me get some access there.
Well, I have something that I got a few years ago from Carlisle, which may be helpful to you if you want to take a look at it. What I have, this is actually my own copy. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah. My own copy of the oral history. But I have it. I do have, as I mentioned to you in one of my emails, I have a CD, not a DVD or CD, because it's not it's not a picture, not a video, it's a
But it's not DVD, right?
recording of his voice and my voice, and all that. But I think probably more useful because it may be very hard to understand him at times,
Mhm.
and it's not all a perfect recording, but maybe more useful to you is, and I think this may not be a perfect transcription, but it's as good as I have. So it's a soft copy of this document, basically.
That'd be outstanding. That'd be outstanding. In
Where
fact, it's to me, it's worth my time if you're interested in going this route, and I'll pay the damages on it. If that's something you can take to like a Kinko's and just have them make a duplicate of it, I'll pay for the shipping and the production of that. I've done
make
that.
make a duplicate of what?
That document, your book, the oral history book that you just showed me,
Yeah.
right? If you took that to a printing company like Kinko's or whatever they have up in DC, uh, generally a book like that size would probably run anywhere from 50 to 100, $125 to duplicate. Let me see if I can find an example. I had a couple of books that were given to me that were written out, they were never published, and I would send them to Kinko's and get duplicates made and send them off to other people that wanted to read them. These are pretty rare. One of them is the daily log of the Vietnam veteran helicopter pilots, right? And I mean, you talk about some interesting reading. That's pretty spot on. This is coming from one of those guys that had a 20% success rate of coming home. But anyway, I'd love to get a hold of that doctor one way or other. It's up to you how you want to do it.
Well, I think let me find my soft copy of this, which I have right here on this computer, and I'm going to look for anything that might be missing there. I remember the last time I really looked at it hard, it maybe not that much is missing, and that part I'd be glad to copy for you, a hard copy, and mail it to you or something.
That'd be more than enough.
But it
Let me know the
seems to
damage.
me if you had the soft copy of it, so you could actually see, see everything, that'd be what you need, right?
Yeah, yeah. I don't have to hear his voice. I mean, unless that's something you want to see, go out to the masses. I don't need the DVD version or the CD version of it.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, it'd be nice to have, but it's not obligatory. I've read over O.P. Smith's oral history,
Yeah.
and there's a couple comments in there that he makes, and I want to quote these correctly. What he calls these army jokers at the chosen. And that was quote word jokers. Just as they were faking injuries just to get on board planes to get out of there and so on and so forth. In the interviews that I've sent you on me with Ray Vallow, he'll speak about that to someone with detail. I'm really interested to see your take on the Ray Vallow interviews. I'm going to send you a link to the Thomas Ricks interview or the Thomas Ricks speaking engagement.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to get into that a little bit and get your take on it. No one knows your grandfather better than you, as far as I'm concerned. So this will be interesting. I'm looking forward to see where this goes.
Yeah.
So,
as far as O.P. Smith goes, I really remember well, and of course, some of that's in this book and this oral history. But I remember my grandfather's opinion of him was not that high. And I think it's because, in part, it's just a basic clash, not so much Army Marine, because my grandfather really admired Marines. At one time he wanted to be a Marine himself, and also General Lem Shepard was a VMI graduate, and he and my grandfather knew each other going way back. And of course, he came out to Korea to visit O.P. Smith, but also to visit the Korean War.
Right.
And he came out, I'm pretty sure he came out to Tokyo when the planning was still going on, because he was the Marine commander in the Pacific.
Right.
Anyway, I think for folks like that, and another good example is Chesty Puller. Chesty Puller went to VMI, didn't graduate there, but went to VMI. And he and my grandfather, by all accounts, got along very well. So those guys were, in my grandfather's eyes, were the kind of fighting Marines that he was used to or he admired.
The guy that you grew up with, right?
Yeah,
Basically.
that's right. That's right. Whereas O.P. Smith, and I always am careful because I realize that O.P. Smith, his caution when my grandfather tended to be bold may have really saved a good part of the 1st Marine Division up at Chosin Reservoir, because he was overly cautious perhaps, but in this case, it was warranted. Maybe he had a sense of what was going to happen, or some of the intel that, that they were collecting. My grandfather certainly knew the Chinese were massing because he personally interrogated some of the Chinese soldiers that were captured.
Even at that point, their reactions, whether it be O.P. Smith or General Almond, their reactions on that intel is based on the intel that they can get. Right?
Yeah.
So those choices, whatever they are or whatever they became, are relevant to part of that information, and the quality of that information we don't know. I mean, he was the one sitting there. He knows better than anybody.
Yeah. The other thing was the MacArthur's top intel officer, Willoughby. Willoughby was, I think he was overconfident about the ability to handle the Chinese. And go ahead.
Well, my take on Willoughby was that his intel going to MacArthur was lackluster at best. In other words, it lacked a lot of details that should have been there.
Yeah.
It would have helped MacArthur make better decisions along the way. We discussed before about how the visual operational orders changed in such a short period of time. And the Vallow interviews will explain that out in further detail. And so I'm coming at it as a student of Vallow, and he doesn't have any harsh words about the Corps, but I, like him, have some harsh words about Corps management, and that points the finger towards O.P. Smith. Look at what happened to Smith after he pulled from the knife.
Hold on a second. Okay. Excuse me, I'm gonna just, I'll get. Hey, Tom? Tom, I'm sorry, I can call you back, but I'm right in the middle of a Zoom meeting here about the Korean War. So let me call you. How late can I call you? Okay, Tom. Okay. Thank you, Tom. All right. Thank you. Bye. A Navy friend. I do have Navy Marine friends.
Well, post-Korean War, 54, I think it is. They had this kind of a reunion thing involving commanders that were in the Korean War. And, Smith was pulled from the 9th Regiment and wanted to go back to the 10th Regiment for his Marines, right? And you'll realize this in the Valor interview from his research. Ridgway says, no, I've got my man, right? And that turned out to be Almond. He had a choice between Almond or Smith, and he chose Almond. And I don't think he chooses Almond because they're both Army. I don't think that's the point at all. I think Lynn Shepard might have had some say in that equation as well, although I don't have any documentation to validate that logic. But at this particular reunion, according to Vallow, all these commanders were invited to get up and speak. and O.P. Smith was not invited to get up to speak.
Right, right.
And that speaks volumes to me as a researcher.
Yeah. I look at my grandfather as nobody's perfect, but he was a fighting man with World War One, highly decorated World War One as a major, captain major. And then, of course, World War Two. He had a very challenging job with the 92nd. He did the best he could, but he's always going to be in the eyes of some. He can never get over the fact that he commanded the 92nd, and 92nd probably didn't do as well as it could have. But that's a very complicated question. And
it really is. When you look at the Italian campaign in the West, once you get above Pisa, and you start getting into the Apennine Mountains, that becomes quite, and I'm going to use the term, and I'm going to be very blunt about saying it becomes a bit of a clusterfuck. You have the Japanese Americans that are fighting up there, the 92nd, and all of them fought with honor. Don't get me wrong about that. But command and control was the issues of World War II in Italy at that point are moving to the east, and it's about chasing the Germans out or capturing them before they get out. I was telling you about sand going to Lake Como. Well, there's a train tunnel that runs from the town of just north of Lake Como going into the Swiss Alps. And their job in the First Army Division was to block those tunnels and those pathways to keep the Germans from getting out of there. Of course, and you have the British coming up on the East Coast, and that's where the focus of the war was at that point. But there were still outliers everywhere else on the west side. My take on it, without putting a whole lot of research into it, struck me as that might have been borderline guerrilla warfare over there. Because these Germans got no place to run, needless to say. And their command and control has been blown out of the water because of what's happening on the east side of the country. So I can see where it could be a little bit more than just challenging. Now, I know military, what's the word? I don't look at maps and give out military advice. I'm not that guy. I'm a armchair quarterback when it comes to that, But I think
my wife and I, speaking of Italy, we were actually there for several reasons. Not very recently, but some years ago, we were there, and we had the ability to drive up. We went up to all the way up, basically the path of the 92nd on that west coast, the Liguria coast, and it was interesting. Trying to think of the name of the town, a very old city on the west coast where he had his headquarters for quite a while, and of course they went all the way to Genoa. The 92nd did at the end of the war in Italy. So it was. I'm glad I got to do that. To see some of the Italian campaign,
right?
As they not as they saw it, but in that area.
Right.
Yeah. So
I would want to say, even Turin's up that way. Leghorn is before Pisa, so you have Pisa. With the Arnold River.
Yeah, we started kind of down at Pisa and worked our way up. Coast. Yeah.
But at that point, once the First Army leaves Pisa, I think they left a little bit there in support, but you had artillery, you had the Japanese, what was it, the 100s or the 200s? I can't remember what the Nike guys were that were in with 92nd. They were working tandem with each other. I still have this picture in my mind of about being, just a level away from being guerrilla warfare, because you have these scattered German troops, and they're basically cut off, from German high command, coming out, managing, trying to get back eastward. I can't imagine being on the ground then. I can tell you that. I wouldn't want a piece of it. Anyway, I'm getting a little off subject here. I set this interview for 1 hour plus a 1 hour overload, and we were approaching the 2 hour mark.
Yeah, and I need to sign off so I can talk to the fellow who just tried to get me there.
Okay.
Did you have any other sort of pressing
No,
subject?
I think it's a real good start to what I think is going to be very, very good going forward.
Good.
Do you have anything you'd like to point out or discuss before we go?
I don't think so. I think we've covered a lot of ground, at least on my life, not so much on my grandfather yet, but uh, and by the way, I don't consider myself an expert on the Korean War, and even unchosen, but I still welcome conversation about
Sure.
my grandfather and General Smith or the Seventh Infantry Division and what
Right.
they were doing
The beer can boys.
east of Chosen, all of that.
There's about probably 6 or 7 hours worth of interviews that I was lucky to take a part of with the Army chapter of the Chosen Few. And I'll send you a link to three of those. One's a very short link about the 31st Tank Battalion. I've got a few questions that are outstanding with regards to that. There comes a point in the war at Chosen where O.P. Smith, from a control point of view, should have contact with those Army forces because he was they were attached to him at that point.
Yep.
That doesn't happen. Stanford, they put him in for Medal of Honor. He's a radio guy. And somebody in the Army thought it was a good idea to put him in charge of these broken lines up there with the 32nd. Still trying to wrap my head around that one. But I mean, there's some good questions up there. I think these videos will help refresh your memory.
Yep.
Should think about it, take a couple notes and some subject matter you might want to discuss along the way. And I'd really like to drill down a little bit about General Allman. Like I said, I think he gets kind of a bad rap, and I think that needs to be addressed. I know it's way after the fact, but I still think it's worthy being done. So, anyway.
Fortunately, I think you've seen me already. I rely on Appleman because I think he, among many historians, has been very fair to my grandfather. And in the official history and in the books he wrote after he left the Office of Military History.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that it'll be hard to dissuade me or to convince me that Appleman was all wrong about Allman, because I think he was right in many respects.
Yeah.
So but we can discuss that another time.
All right. Have you read Russ or Mossman or any of those?
I have Russ's book. Which one are you talking about? The
Breakout?
Yeah, Breakout, right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. I'm just trying to figure out, where we have some commonality. So if I start throwing some questions, I have a sense of where you're at with it too. So, all right, sir, you have a wonderful evening.
You too.
I appreciate your time. God bless you.
Thanks to your lady friend for setting up the Zoom.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, I'm not Mandy Mom. Again.
One other question, not about this conversation, but that other group that that we've been meeting from time to time, and I think you've said there would maybe be one more meeting with them.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, but really the second meeting kind of convinced me that what needs to be done is not something that we can really manage in terms of trying to get people to get reinvigorated, put out these TikToks. I mean, I don't know how you would recruit somebody for a position such as that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It seems like it has to be generic and crash rooted. I do have a gentleman that wants to do some blog work with me on it. He's got a couple of deals that he wants to put together. I'm hoping that we can take some excerpts from our interviews and possibly put those out there in little 4 or 5 minute cutouts here and there.
Mhm.
If I do go that route with that, I'm gonna route them all through you, because I want to get your check off on that, know that I have your permission on them. I don't want to put something out there that I may have gotten wrong or misworded or whatever along the way. Have military historians like their details, so I want to make sure we get it right. So,
Understand. Okay, Bob.
all right, young man, you have a good evening.
Have a good one.
That said well.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
putting up with us.
Good night.
Good night.